Hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled How Distributed Workforce Trends Are Changing Employee Communications. My name is Rihanna Collier and I'm Vice President and Managing Director of SIIA's Software and Services Division and the Tech Council of Southern California. And I am joined today by Sam Keninger, Head of Product Marketing at Simpplr, who will be taking you through today's discussion. Simpplr helps companies connect, engage, and empower their workforce. So we are very lucky to have Sam here to share his experiences on evolving employee communications. Before I turn it over to Sam, for those of you who are unfamiliar with SIIA, just a little background on who we are. SIIA is a global organization representing the interests of software and digital content companies. The Software and Services Division represents the ISV community, not specific to any size or vertical, and the Tech Council of Southern California is a regional chapter of the Software and Services Division focusing specifically on technology innovation happening in the Southern California region. Now, SIIA has multiple divisions to serve our constituents, and across all of the divisions we strive to advocate on behalf of our members, provide professional and business development opportunities, create peer networking and thought leadership opportunities, and provide pertinent industry education. So, how do you get involved? Well, this slide is specific to the software and services side of the organization. However, many of these opportunities also apply to the other divisions. Our members take advantage of our communities, events, marketing, and PR support, our market research, and of course opportunities to showcase their thought leadership through things like speaking opportunities and board participation. So we have a robust calendar of events, both in person and virtual, for your involvement. In particular, I want to highlight the SIIA Annual Conference and Cody Awards event taking place June 11th through 13th in San Francisco. This conference brings together really the best of SIIA and the best of the industry to really discuss growth. You can go to SIIA.net/annual for more information. I hope you'll join us. We have 3 days packed with interactive sessions, executive roundtables, one-on-one business connections, networking events, and of course the annual announcement of the 2018 Cody Award winners. Finally, we would be delighted to have your participation in all SIIA activities. We have individual and corporate membership available. My contact details are there on the screen. Feel free to contact me with any questions about membership or how to get involved. And before we jump in to why we're here today, just a couple of housekeeping reminders. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording along with the slide deck will be sent out to you later today. All of your phone lines are on mute. However, we want to be sure to address any questions you have, so you can ask your questions throughout the presentation in the chat box on the left of your screen. Employee communication in today's world is extremely critical, so I hope you will take this opportunity to leverage Sam, our expert, and ask any relevant questions. We will go ahead and address all of those at the end of Sam's presentation. If for some reason we don't get to your question, we'll make sure that Sam can address it offline. So now without further ado, on to why we're here today, to talk about how distributed workforce trends are changing employee communications. So I would like to turn it over to Sam. Again, Sam Keninger, Head of Product Marketing at Simpplr. Sam, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Rihanna, and thank you everybody for joining. Thanks to the SIIA for inviting me to speak today. Really excited about today's event. Like Rihanna was saying, my name is Sam Keninger. I represent a company called Simpplr, and in very basic terms, Simpplr is trying to create the modern employee intranet for the year 2018. So what would that employee intranet look like if it was built for 2018? It would play nice with the cloud. It would be very easy to use, good UI. It would integrate with contemporary cloud-based technologies. It'd be easy to search, so on and so forth. I think today I really want to focus the conversation on trends and how the world is changing and how kind of the resurgence of the employee intranet and the focus of employee communications is really kind of coming about. One of the charters for SIIA is specifically advocacy and really having an understanding of how technology is changing our world for better and for worse. So some of the topics I'll go through today will really kind of highlight some of these trends. In my opinion, a lot of these trends are undercovered from a press and awareness perspective. So something just to be conscious about, and then the ask for this presentation is really to internalize what's going on around us and just try to make sense of how this affects our world as a whole. I promise this will not be a product-related infomercial. We'll keep it at the trends level. So as we start out, really want to talk about what problem we're trying to solve here. And generally speaking, when we're talking about employee communications kind of topics, it all kind of points back to employee engagement. So every year Gallup goes out and they survey the North American workforce, and they come back with a report that gauges how employee engagement is doing, particularly in the United States. And pretty much every year, like clockwork, they come back with numbers that are staggering that say effectively 70% of us are not engaged at work. 70% are not engaged at work. So this is clearly a staggering number. And on one hand, you can appreciate how staggering the number is. On the other hand, it's admittable that the term employee engagement is somewhat murky. People often struggle trying to define it, and I think that's part of the problem. We need to do a better job in industry really articulating these challenges and the problems. But that being said, 70%. Imagine if you're coaching a basketball team and 2/3 of your players are half-assing it. Just like think about the profound impact that has on a company's ability to compete, to innovate, to deliver excellent customer experiences, so on and so forth. So that's effectively the problem that we want to anchor on as we go into the presentation. Now, with this in mind, if you think about that 70% number, what I want to walk through here is, first and foremost, let's take a look at what engages knowledge workers in particular. If 70% of us are disengaged, then it serves to reason that we should really understand the drivers of employee engagement first and foremost. Then I'm going to go through those trends that I alluded to earlier. So we'll talk about some of the trends that are happening in the digital workforce or digital workplace and beyond. And then we'll tie it back at the end, and we'll talk specifically about how intranets and other technologies, not just employee intranets, are striving to kind of address these problems. And really the answer to the case is we're really changing the industry as we speak and kind of morphing what is conceived as an intranet to address these problems. So we'll map that all together at the end. So let me talk about what engages knowledge workers. And the best reference that I can find is really this book by Daniel Pink, Drive. Many of you may have read it. It came out, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, Daniel Pink is a journalist by trade, but really interested in social economic kind of topics, and he writes a lot of books and things that are kind of in this social realm. And specifically, he wanted to do a study on incentives. Right at the time, it was commonly believed that to drive employee engagement, you need to give employees more money, and that compensation is by and large a bigger driver of employee engagement than anything else. So he wanted to challenge this assertion, and he teamed up with some researchers at MIT to do a series of studies to really understand how and where financial incentives drive engagement outcomes. And what he found was when it was mechanical work activities, think of like working on a factory assembly line, for example, this behavior acted as anticipated. The more money you give to somebody to crank out X amount of widgets, the better, faster, more efficient they will perform. But when the activities required right brain cognitive kind of work, then financial incentives actually caused people to perform worse. And I'll repeat that. The more money that you gave people for these creative right brain kind of activities, the poorer their performance were. Now this is really important to note because for the majority of us, particularly everybody on this call I'm presuming, and the majority of the North American service-based economy, we would fall into this right brain cognitive worker kind of category. It's not mechanical tasks. It's really more about creative thinking and problem solving. And again, what they found was financial incentives actually will hurt if you rely on them too much. And at the time, this was a pretty profound insight because when you think about just managerial practices, we reward our top performers and continue to throw money at them. Middle performers, we may throw them a little bit, and then the low performers, they get nothing. So our whole compensation kind of strategy is aligned around this. And what the insights are saying, this is what is not what drives employee engagement anyway. So then the question to follow up on, well, what are those key drivers of employee engagement? And then the researchers dug a little bit deeper, and they really aligned on these three attributes are the key drivers of employee engagement. So first, autonomy, the ability to be self-directed. That means give me a goal. Don't tell me how to do it. Don't breathe over my shoulder as I complete my tasks. Just let me creatively figure out how to solve that goal myself. Mastery. If I'm not getting better, I'm getting worse. So people innately want to be challenged and want to feel as though they're growing in the workplace. And if they're not, typically there's a feeling that they're getting worse, and that can be self-destructive. And then finally, purpose. We all want to go to work and align with something greater. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean we all have to work for UNICEF or something like that. But we do want to go to work and feel as though we're building something that's bigger than what it was when we started. And they found that purpose is the third driver that really aligns to this. So what we'll do is I'm going to pause on these three drivers. I just wanted to kind of benchmark this because at the end of the presentation we'll tie it back together and we'll reconcile it with the trends that are happening in the workplace today, and then also with how we're defining these new employee communications tools to really address these means. Okay, so that was the first section. Second section, and probably the most fun one for everybody on this call, is really kind of discussing the trends that are really impacting these changes that we're talking about and what we collectively as a society probably need to be conscious of to address right now. And I'll go through 4 specific trends. Okay, the first trend is that we are becoming more and more distributed. The remote workforce is growing at a rapid pace. I'll share some numbers in a little bit, but this is a trend that we are right in the middle of, and it's accelerating. To kind of jump in and kind of go through some of these numbers to put some color around it, currently the average 500 employee company has 12 locations. Now, it's not news that it's in and of itself 12 locations. The interesting fact about that is if you were to look at, this is from census data, if you were to look at census data from 20 years ago, it would have been half that. So a typical company has more and more office locations, and we are naturally spread among these locations further apart than we historically have. So there's big implications on company culture, on how we communicate, and how connected we feel. The fastest growing section of the workforce since the Great Recession is telecommuters, people that spend the majority of their work working remotely. Now, this is, on one hand, a very exciting prospect for society, right? So companies can hire talent. They're not limited to geographic restrictions. and so they can source better talent than they otherwise could. Employees, there's work-life balance implications. There's a subsegment of the workforce who otherwise would not be willing to work because of family commitments and whatnot. So this is a great meet in the middle, and technology more than anything is helping facilitate even this capability to work remote. Now, a lot of people worry about the implications of remote workers. They think that they're at home doing their laundry, watching Oprah, so on and so forth. The data actually says the reverse. Our telecommuters and our remote employees are magnitudes more productive than those of us in an office, and in a large part because they don't have the distractions that a lot of people have in the office. So by and large, this should be seen as a good trend, but there's some trade-offs, and a big trade-off that's happening just is the fact that these remote employees are struggling to feel connected to their workplace and to really feel a sense of cohesion with their coworkers. In simple terms, it's lonely, and those of us who have worked remotely for extended periods of time can definitely relate to how isolated and lonely you can feel, even though you are as productive as you feel there. Another trend that's happening, a third of us are considered gig economy workers, contractors versus full-time employees. So this kind of adds into the mix and another kind of aspect of the challenge, where what we're trying to really address is this sense of togetherness, cohesion in the workplace, getting everybody on the same team. It's harder and harder now that a growing number of us are contractors, and we're not all in terms of employment. So this is a trend that we are right in the middle of, and it's going to even accelerate over the next 10 years. So for example, if we go to the next slide here, by 2020, 3/4 of us will be categorized as a truly mobile workforce. Now, the definition of a mobile workforce, based on this study, are individuals who are not tethered to their physical workstations to do their job. So, and I'd wager to bet the majority of us on the call are already there, right? We take emails from home at night. We get on conference calls when we're on vacation from the beach, and we're able to do all this with a lot of technological gains. But the ramifications for society, as we talk about this advocacy trend for SIIA, is that on one hand we're busier and busier and busier, but on the other hand we're farther and farther less connected than we have been previously. By 2025, 3/4 of us will be millennials. Millennials come with different workplace expectations, and it's important to be conscious of that. I'll jump into that on the next slide. And then that freelancer economy trend, where today it's about 34% of us are what we would deem gig economy or contractors. This is going to explode, and we need to be ready for it. It's not just Uber drivers who are contractors. This is going to be profoundly different in the white-collar workplace. An interesting way to look at this, too, is if you look at President Trump's tax plan that just got passed, the effective contractor federal rate got dropped to 21%, where a lot of knowledge workers are paying their taxes at 35, 37%. So in many ways, it behooves a lot of us to even consider becoming contractors from a tax perspective, and that's just going to feed this trend even more. So expect for that growth to happen. We talked about millennials, okay, and this is a study from Deloitte that recently came out that also kind of ties into what really matters for millennials in the workplace. Is something we want to address. Millennials, more than other generations before them, have put a higher priority on work-life balance and on flexibility. So when we talk about being able to work remote and be more and more distributed, tie in and reconcile your work-life balance, millennials are expecting it and actually demanding it in the workplace. So this trend's only going to be affirmed by generational perspectives. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at these other attributes that they prioritize, opportunities to progress, be leaders, a sense of meaning from work, professional development in their training programs, these all map to autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So it all aligns to those same engagement drivers that we talked about in the Daniel Pink book. So this is the first trend that we really wanted to talk about, and that's just simply the fact that the world is becoming more and more distributed, and because it's becoming more distributed, we have to take the good with the bad. The good is there's a lot more flexibility. There's probably a lot of more productive and creative ways to get business done. On the negative side, it can be more disenfranchising and make it a little bit more lonely for employees. Second trend. We're currently in a place where there's 4 generations of employees in the workplace. So not only are millennials kind of coming into the workplace in large numbers, you could arguably say Generation Z is already coming into the workplace. Baby boomers are staying in the workplace longer and are not retiring as fast as previous generations, right? So what that means is there's a wide spectrum of employees in the workplace. Now, when you look at this from an employee communication perspective, there's clearly a lot of cultural integration challenges that need to be addressed. The one that I want to hone in on is really not what you would think, though. It has more to do with technology preferences and the pace of change that technology preferences are and how that's changing the workplace and actually adding quite a bit of confusion here. So if you were to look at somebody's physical workspace in the year 1948, so imagine somebody worked for a big corporation in 1948. They had a desk, an office, and you look at the actual physical workspace of their desk. They would have probably a telephone. They would probably have a big calendar to write on, and then maybe they'd have a notebook and some pens and papers, maybe a stapler. Now fast forward to the year 1982, and you look at that desk. The actual materials on that desk did not really change that much. So nearly 40 years pass, and the same materials that somebody's using on their workspace is about the same. Now look at what's going on with our generation. With the advent of personal computing and the fact that the majority of what makes up our workplace is comprised of the software applications that are used, those software applications have been changing extremely rapidly, and with this, generations have a tendency to hold on to their preferences. So I'm in the middle of this pack. I'm considered a Gen Xer, so I am stuck with some of the preferences that I've learned early on. Right? I still use Outlook. My peers use Gmail. I'm afraid to use Gmail because I don't like the conversation workflow, and I'm afraid I might erroneously reply to all in a situation where I just want to respond to one person. So I still use this old technology, even though everybody else is using a newer one. Now, the problem is when you have different people using different technologies, it makes it harder and harder to communicate and get on the same page. It's not just your email applications, but it's everything that you're doing and your approach. So that makes it harder for people to communicate. And when you spread this across 4 different generations, and different generations have different technology preferences, different UI sensibilities, different technical skills, all this starts to create a lot of confusion and challenges in the workplace, trying to get people effectively on the same page. This is uberly important when you're talking about communications because different people want to communicate on different platforms. You got your Slack, you got GChat, you got email, and you've got a variety of different systems. If not everybody is on the same page of what systems you want to use, then it's going to be very hard to communicate and get on the same page strategically for a business. And that's going to lead me into the next trend, which is simply put, we have too many systems right now. Now, all these productivity systems that we have individually are fantastic. They're amazing. But collectively, they're a headache. So here's some numbers kind of on this, right? The average employee needs to access 11 systems to do their job. Now, I laugh at this because being in marketing, I can count 50 systems that I have access to, and and it's noisy and it's hard to find the most relevant information. It's hard to remember where I need to go to get stuff, and it's hard to stay on the same page with my coworkers. According to McKinsey, 20% of our time is spent just looking for information. So one day a week, we're spending just trying to hunt down the right information we need to do our job. And then they took that and calculated it from a macro level and claimed that it's over $1 trillion of impact on our economy. So take that for what it's worth. But we're spending a lot of time just hunting for information because we've encountered this new age of what we would deem counter productivity with all these different applications. So this is the third trend. And as you look at these three trends, I just want to really amplify the fact that all this is kind of pointing together. By and large, these are making very positive impacts to our life, making us more productive, giving us more flexibility, allowing us to get work done from anywhere. We can travel, we can make it to our kids' t-ball games. All those are great things, and that's amazing. But on the same hand, you have to appreciate that all this is also making it harder for us to connect, communicate, and get work done. And it can be a very lonely experience. As I was putting together these slides, I picked this picture specifically because it evokes loneliness, and that's kind of the sense of connection that we're really trying to address here. Then finally, the last trend that we're really spending a lot of time with are specifically the use of technology and what underlying technologies are changing right before our eyes, right? So there's a picture of a mobile app. I think mobile's established, and kind of talking about mobile trends is a little bit overplayed, and get on with it already. But the trends that we encounter specifically for our industry that are important, the migration to the cloud, still very relevant for employee communications because by and large a lot of the legacy employee communications platforms were behind the firewall, and for whatever reason these kind of served as the last kind of bastion of IT applications that need to be migrated to the cloud. And then artificial intelligence. So in our world, the world of employee communications, AI provides a lot of promise and a lot of exciting opportunities. If you look at a lot of the systems of yesteryear, they were challenged because it was hard to search. It was hard to identify and find that information that you need to. Many intranets of yesteryear became content dumping grounds, so there's a lot of garbage in there and a lot of stale content. So we're really excited about how AI has, in the first phase, really improved search and started with recommendation engines and bringing in profile heuristics to really understand who's looking for the information and serving up the latest and most in-demand content. But over the next 5 years, we'll see even more advances. We're currently developing bots that will help kind of facilitate the communication process alone, so helping executives focus on what's important so that they can beat the drum and keep everybody laser focused on company mission and goals and whatnot. We're seeing AI really kind of help auto-serve and auto-populate content that's important to people based on their profiles without them even having to search on it. And that's really important because you don't want to build a communication system where employees have to look for stuff. We've been so accustomed to either having it served to us on our homepage or being able to locate it through search, that we need to really kind of align with these usability standards and make it easier for employees. It's a big driver for getting adoption for these systems. So these are the 4 trends that I wanted to talk about. And now I'm gonna bring it back and then talk about just the broader engagement mix. So talk about the various systems that people are using to address this employee engagement problem. Again, the 70% of employees are currently not engaged at work. And if you're to believe that number, as staggering as it is, then it serves to reason that we need to put some effort in building technologies to address this problem. So we'll talk through that, and then we'll go back and we'll reconcile these trends to what really drives engagement and why employee communications is important for that, and more specifically what we would call a modern intranet. So today, if you look at the software ecosystem of different types of technologies that are trying to solve the employee engagement problem, these are the 4 major ones that are going to show up. Now, I do believe that collectively all of them serve their place, and one is not better than the other 3. And there is no silver bullet on this spot, so a portfolio-based approach makes a lot of sense. So let's go through each of these. Engagement surveys. So it's very popular right now for technology companies. Go to HR departments, sell engagement kind of survey technology. There's some pure play vendors out there. There's the customer experience vendors who started with, say, NPS surveys, are now doing employee NPS surveys. The companies like Gallup have been doing consulting-backed survey approaches for several years. They have the Gallup 12, which is a trademarked survey methodology, which is, in their words, scientifically backed to really kind of address engagement in a variety of forms. So these are great, but it's important to recognize that while they'll diagnose, they don't fix. And furthermore, I think there's a deeper understanding of employee engagement surveys that organizations are kind of missing the boat on. A lot of them will conduct the survey, take the results at face value, and then try to put in action plans. Now, I'm not saying that the process of actioning your feedback is bad, but what we've learned as we've dug deeper into this space is that the survey alone is a great indicator of identifying where there's smoke, but a very poor indicator of understanding what the root cause is behind that smoke is. So you need to double click onto the survey results by interviewing and doing some deeper analysis to understand specifically what the root problem is. So surveys tell you what the whats are, but they don't tell you what the whys are. You see a lot of incentive management companies, vendors. These are vendors that will manage kind of spiffs and rewards. Some are kind of fruity, some are more traditional incentive compensation systems. But a lot of them are really kind of trying to latch on to improving the incentive management or the employee engagement outcomes and everything. Important to recall back when we looked at what the drivers of employee engagement are, specifically from Daniel Pink's research, claiming that monetary incentives actually may be counterproductive and may actually be hurting the cause. So in that vein, it doesn't make sense to overinvest in monetary spiffs. Now, there are other sorts of incentives, and a lot of these systems are programming rewards and attaboys that are not kind of financial. So in that regard, I think these systems are seen as very innovative. Long way to go. They're definitely in their infancy in a somewhat nascent kind of space, but there should be some exciting learnings from this over the next couple of years. Talent management, your HR systems are going to always claim to be in the employee engagement business. And my take on this is it's a system of record. This is where I store my W-4s, and this is tied to my payroll and everything. It's really not it's really not an employee engagement platform or whatever you want to call it. These are just poorly marketed. Same argument could be held like your annual performance review software may give you good feedback and may spur an employee to take some action and fix some things, but just the nature of my annual performance review alone and the fact that I only do it once a year is telling on how systematically that's really going to drive employee engagement across the board. So don't think that your talent management vendor is going to completely solve this problem. And then you have the modern intranets, where the argument here that we're trying to build is that this can serve as a system of engagement to connect your employees better and to align them. Again, when we talked about how the world is becoming more and more distributed, how we have a lot of different locations, many of us are working from home. Where do you go if you just need a place to connect with your coworkers? The social water cooler if you are that remote employee. Where do you go to have that common cultural bond across all your business locations? You have to do it virtually because you can't do that with you're within multiple physical locations. So locations alone will dictate your culture. So that's what we're trying to do with modern intranets. Now, as I go to the next slide here, the internet space has been evolving in its own right. Clearly, these have been around for a long time. Many of us can remember the first time we logged into SharePoint. SharePoint came out probably about 20 years ago. And it's important when you think about these technologies to respect the time and the era that they were developed and the problems that they were trying to solve when they were developed. So back in the 90s when SharePoint was coming out, the big challenge was we were at work and we had just started to network all of our personal computers. So it was the emergence of the network drive. And those of us who worked in the 90s, you can remember your IT people would say, oh, okay, that's stored on the I drive or the J drive or the K drive. And I'd have to go to my version of Windows Explorer and I'd click on it, and then that would have subfolders, and then that would have subfolders, and eventually I'd find my information. What we realized was the user experience of navigating through all these click paths and all these shared drives was really hard. So the first incarnations of the internets really sought to put a face on that network drive and help facilitate it so that content was easier to find. And I think it's a very laudable kind of cause and something that was necessary at the time. Now the whole paradigm's changed today, right? We don't even think of like going through ClickPath. We think of going through search, and that stuff will automatically show up and that the search will be smart enough to bring it forward for us. But a lot of the technologies have evolved kind of on this linear development curve and haven't been able to adjust with today's reality. So unfortunately, a lot of the technology that we see here is lagging behind the expectations that we have in the marketplace. In 2005, we had social networks come out, and they completely transformed our personal lives. So we had Facebook and LinkedIn, and they were really they did disrupt the way we communicate in our personal lives. So it didn't take very long for a lot of the same kind of comparable technologies to come to businesses and say, we need a social network for business, right? Because clearly everybody's using it at home. We need to have that same kind of engagement in the office. Now the challenge with this was it was a technology in search of a problem. Okay, so the first iterations of the company social network, and many of you who have these social networks still at your company probably still feel this, is employees didn't know what to use it for. So it didn't take very long that people's patterns just started to use it for the same thing they use it at home. They post happy hour photos and use it just for a little bit of social banter, but didn't really know how to bring it in to the workflow of their day-to-day work lives. So it didn't take very long for these types of solutions to be pretzeled into becoming intranets and becoming the employee communications tools because people spent a lot of money on this technology, and they needed to salvage it for what it's worth. So the technology got pretzeled, and what was kind of left behind was kind of a Frankenstein-looking software technology space where people didn't really need all these capabilities, or the capabilities weren't necessarily purpose-built. So today, here we are, and what we're trying to do is rebuild this industry from scratch because employee communications are more critical than ever, arguably because of the employee engagement problem, because of these trends that we talk about. We're further and further removed. We're inundated with all this information, and we need a place that will focus us on company strategy, company cultural norms, and collectively bring us together. So the need still exists. The technology just needs to be built from the ground up. So now real quickly, let's kind of tie it back to how these modern, and I won't say just intranets, but employee communications platforms are really seeking to address the trends that we went through. So multiple generations at work, it's about aligning the communication, being transparent, and making sure that everybody is operating along the same drumbeat, has a single source of strategic truth. Not saying a single system of record for absolutely everything. I'm not saying an everything hub, but a single place where everybody can agree and align on this is what the company is about, this is what the company's strategy is, this is where I go to connect with my coworkers. Distributed workforce, it creates that virtual water cooler. It gives an open place for employees who are not in physical workplace to go and connect with their employees. And I know I threw shade on the social networks of the past for being social and not work-related. But in the same token, I think this is important when contextually done right for the sake of inclusion and making sure everybody's connected with the rest of their workplace. Advancing technology, we already talked about this with the advances of technology, particularly AI. It's going to improve our speed, productivity, and it's going to better automagically serve up content and connections to your coworkers, really reinforcing your own internal network of who you know and who you collaborate with. And then finally, the information explosion. I kind of talked about this a little bit. It creates a hub in the sense that this is the place where I go for my critical corporate information. Now similarly, if you think back to the Daniel Pink book, how this will map back to the three drivers of employee engagement: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. For autonomy, it's a function of my tools and my access, which means I can only be self-directed and get my work done if I have the tools to navigate and get critical information to do my job. So autonomous doesn't necessarily mean purely independent and self-driven. What it means is self-directed, and having access to the knowledge and that focus will help that cause as well. Mastery, same kind of thing. Friction creates frustration. If I spend that 20% of my work week looking for information, beating my head against a wall, just trying to find stuff that should be easy, that demoralizes me, and that takes energy away from me when I could be focused on growing and getting stuff done. So that friction is debilitating, and will eventually, a lot of us kind of hit ourselves against a wall too many times that we just give up. And unfortunately, that is the case in a lot of places, a lot of work environments. And then finally, purpose, right? I mean, communication is the linchpin, right? You need a place where management executives can focus the conversation, remind everybody why we're at this company, what we're trying to achieve, focus everybody to see the big picture, understand how they align to the big picture, and continuously beat the drum on the strategy. That's the most important aspect of employee engagement, and in my mind, it's the most important aspect of company performance because it drives customer experience, it drives innovation, it drives productivity onward and upward, right? So if you show me a Glassdoor review, and you know how on Glassdoor they'll have the approve of CEO kind of rating front and center. If you show me a poor CEO approval, I guarantee you that that CEO is a poor communicator, and that CEO isn't doing what they need to be doing to beat the drum and standing in front of their own organization to focus the conversation on what they're trying to achieve. We as rank and file employees, we get tunnel vision. We get kind of subject to our own to-do list and a lot of times struggle to up-level the conversation for ourselves on how this matters for the broader purpose of the organization. So it's incumbent on the organization to provide this communication channel that focuses and up-levels everything. Okay. So real quick, and I know this isn't an intranet audience. This slide deck was specifically for internal communicators originally, so I'll fly through this. But we've been doing research specifically on why intranets fail, and the reason being is as we're rebuilding this industry, we want to learn from the sins of yesteryear and then build out either functional capabilities or whole product service offerings that will help our customers mitigate these risks going forward. And these are the major reasons that they have failed in the past. Poor UI, search, and information architecture is a big one. We've talked about this in the trends again and again, but basically anytime you have enterprise-wide software technology, a tool that needs to be accessed by every employee, you have to have the UI that is so easy that they don't need to be trained on how to use it. If you need to train your users on how to use the software, you've already lost. It needs to be intuitive and accessible from day one. And the way that you do that is you build the UI to leverage consumer-grade constructs so that people already intuitively know how to use the software. This is a big problem in our industry, and I'm sure in many of your industries as well. Technical bottlenecks, 20 years ago when SharePoint came out, you needed a technical administrator to administer it. And that's because they know how to code and they know how to set up the systems to keep these things afloat. Well, those requirements aren't there 20 years later. You can have lay people with point-and-click configuration capabilities, but the models of having IT kind of serve as the central gatekeeper for all this stuff still exists. We see a lot of problems with ownership and governance, particularly when IT stands up these platforms, they set it, and then they forget about it, and they don't have people to manage it on the back end. See this in a lot of industries, specifically in ours, happens as well. Becomes a content dumping ground, so we're developing a lot of software capabilities to ensure and controls that ensure we keep everything fresh, and if content's not being used, it gets archived. And then most importantly, like we were talking about earlier, about purpose being the linchpin, executives need to be engaged. This is the type of industry where it's not enough to have executive buy-in. You need executives to be on this thing and leading the charge time and time again. And then some of these capabilities, you can take a quick screenshot. I won't go through there. These are some of the capabilities that you really need to look for to map to a lot of those challenges. Okay, so with that, I have a couple minutes here. We'll go into Q&A. I see some questions have started to come in, but if you have additional questions, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And if we don't get to them today, I'll respond to them tonight.
Sam, that was fantastic. As somebody who's been a remote employee for 12 years, and SIA definitely has a distributed workforce, a lot of what you covered today definitely hits home and very personal to me. So I thought that was fantastic. We do have a couple questions I want to try and get through. Actually, one that you just kind of touched on one of the issues that intranets fail, and you said it was the unclear ownership or governance. Mm-hmm. Given all the different systems we have, what department owns the intranet? I mean, because every department has their own opinions and what they want to use it for and so forth. And I know you need to have a collaborative view of how it's going to be used to make it successful. But what department drives that?
Yeah. So if I were to visually kind of draw a pie chart for you guys, the way that ownership after an implementation typically looks would be 10% of the time nobody, and I can pretty much guarantee you those initiatives are going to fail in the next 18 months, so definitely don't want to do that. Probably 60% of the time it's going to roll up into a marketing function, and the titles are typically internal communications. These individuals oftentimes are paired with your outbound communications, so your PR people, but they roll up to the CMO. And then the remainder would be an HR or compliance kind of role with a similar title, internal communications. The things that I would look out for is what I see more often than not are these individuals in communications roles, whether they're in HR or in marketing, are typically somewhat junior roles and do not lead the requirements gathering phase. For whatever reason, IT kind of serves as the alphas, and they go out and they'll go to the entire organization. They'll get requirements. They'll go through a deployment, they'll stand up the thing, and then they ride off on their horse, and either they'll dump it on this internal comms role, or they'll leave it for nobody. And that's a bad model, and a model for that's just destined for failure. So in terms of who should own it, I would recommend like one of those comms roles, specifically either in a marketing or an HR kind of function. They both have their pros and cons. I prefer a marketing function because ultimately what you're trying to do is focus the company's strategy, what you're trying to achieve, aligning with executives on how we're meeting our targets, et cetera. And that's a little bit closer on the business side to the marketing side, whereas when it's housed in HR, unfortunately a lot of times these things just become portals that host the lunch menu and tell you where to get your benefits documents. But they can be on both sides. And then the appreciation that you need to have the whole organization kind of bought into it. So yes, you need to have a centralized kind of owner, like the champion and the person who's accountable for the whole program. But you need to departmentally distribute that ownership across the board so that all departments have some skin in the game. This is somewhat technical, but we talk about that hub and spoke model where IT historically has been a bottleneck. Well, we've solved that problem now that you have what we call point-and-click administration, meaning somebody who doesn't have technical skills can set up a site and upload content and program the internet as they please. Now, in that model, you can distribute this ownership and federate it across departments. So now you have a point of contact who represents the legal department, a point of contact that represents the London office, a point of contact who represents being an affinity site like the softball team. And then everybody's kind of administrator, and then you just have a much more lively community that's in your digital workplace. So the answer to the question, I know I'm rambling a little bit, is it should be somebody central on the business side, not IT, preferably marketing, but HR will work. And then they need to build up a posse of stakeholders around them who take accountability for administering their own respective domains.
Okay, that makes sense. We just have a couple minutes. I'm going to try and cram two quick questions in for you before we let you go. Where do you think we are today as far as companies who use the internet still for just a means of sharing information but not to communicate. And then the second part would be what's the general lifespan then of an intranet before businesses start searching for new technology?
Yeah, I think both are. We're in an industry that's in drastic need of just a colossal remodel, right? So if you're going to liken an image to, I don't know, your house or something, the kitchen is 40 years old. The cabinets are like a poorly stained old chipped walnut. The countertops are vinyl. There's no stainless steel. There's no marble countertops or anything. So we just need to gut the thing and remodel the industry as a whole. And I really believe that just because of so much Frankenstein expectations. In terms of focusing the conversation specifically on alignment versus just being a portal to host documents, we're in maybe the third inning. There are a lot of great companies that are really understanding this and differentiating because of it, but we haven't really kind of made it mainstream yet. The average lifespan of an intranet, I'll answer it two ways. So on one hand, they never go away. So they're almost in perpetuity because you see time and time again where it's kind of a weed and people don't want to do the migration and you get a lot of content on these things. So they kind of just fester kind of in the background. But on the other hand, you see a quick slope of engagement where you launch these things. They typically run really well for a year, maybe a year and a half. And then when people leave their jobs or when you don't have the owners to really keep it fresh and lively and front of mind, it definitely starts to slide off. So from an engagement perspective, the answer is probably a year and a half. From an actual lights are on and you're paying the bills, these things can stay in there for years. You'd be surprised.
Well, that's great. Sam, thank you so much. I certainly learned a lot today. We really appreciate your time. Again, for the audience, this is being recorded, and we will share the recording and the slide deck with you. Feel free to circulate to your teams. And if anybody has any further questions for Sam, please let us know. We'll definitely be sure to connect you. Sam, thank you again, and everybody have a great day.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.